All right, is everything good? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am very happy to be here because yesterday morning I got a notification that my trip was canceled. And I was like, so thankfully, everything is good and I'm here. So, and it's a pleasure to get to see everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Hibah Awwad, and I'm one of the Traumatic Brain Injury Program Directors at NINDS. And everyone knows Ben. So Ben Turin is my co-chair on this program, and he is the program director that oversees post-traumatic epilepsy and epilepsy portfolio. So we're very grateful to have everyone here. So we'll basically just have a look over the workshop agenda for those of you that may not have gotten a chance to look through it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the program and then start going into a little bit more details about the review process. And the two main things that I hope we can come out of from this workshop is for everyone to get to know each other and to feel more comfortable with CDEs. Some of you are more aware of CDEs and have been working with them for a much longer time than others. And so it can be overwhelming when you start working with CDEs and looking at them. So we're hoping that some of that will ease away that, that new feeling to CDs. But also we need to make some decisions about the review process, how we want to move forward. And, as you know, we don't really have a preclinical CDE program at NIH. And so we're kind of setting the stage for how we want future steps in the program to happen. So all your feedback is very important in the process. So if you have any comments, whether they're small or they're major, like why are we doing things this way, please let us know. This is the time for us to have this conversation and to move things forward. So, so this morning we're going to talk about the process, and part of the process I will include the common data model that we're considering adopting for the program. And this model is called the CDISC Send, which is used by the FDA. So we've invited Dr. Stephanie Lowenroth-Quinn to talk to us about how the FDA uses that program and data standards for applications that come to them. And then we'll have a small break, and the spinal cord injury group is offering everyone coffee because we cannot do that. So thank you to all the spinal cord injury foundations and to Adam and Kareem for that. And then we have an activity where we'll have two breakout rooms. And I believe it's in Salon C as well as here. And the plan is to have the data science group discuss an activity that we've put together for them to based on what we hear today from, our FDA person and all of the expertise in the room, what exactly we can utilize from that model, whether it is the appropriate model for preclinical CDEs in neurotrauma or not. And then in the other breakout room, we'll have our working group members continue working on their scope as well as their reviewer assignments and continuing the gap analysis. So we'll have Ben and Yukta in this room for the data science working group. And we'll have Sharita and Fatima in Salon B for the sub-working group breakout room. And then we'll break for lunch. So I did put it in there that if the CDE leads would like to meet and discuss the review process, then that's a good opportunity. I believe spinal cord injury is sponsoring lunch for the first 50 people. Priority is for spinal cord injury investigators. So depending on who's in the room, you might end up being able to get lunch. Otherwise, I believe there is across the street, there is a food market where people can go. Can you share a little bit more information about that? Because is it just like All right, so across the street, Reading Terminal, and you'll have whatever your mind desires. All right, and then please be back by 12:45 so we can get ready for the second activity. And the second activity is mainly the Neurotrauma Core Working Group coming together to decide on the selection criteria, because this conversation comes up a lot about how do we decide what is common. Some people say at least 2 publications. Some people say 5 publications. Some people say 10. Some people say, why are we looking at only publications? Let's look at other stuff like data sets, you know? So we want to have that conversation as to what is our selection criteria for the common core CDEs. So these are the CDEs that will be across every single preclinical study. And so everyone's contribution will be very useful for that. In the Neurotrauma Core Working Group, the Data Science Working Group has already started their discussions on, the different user case scenarios with regards to preclinical CDEs, whether you're a data scientist or an investigator or a repository or, a journal looking at data. So they will continue these conversations and also discuss how can we make CDEs more user-friendly through different mapping tools. So for those that are in this different sub-working groups and are not part of the Neurotrauma Core or the Data Science Working Group, you're welcome to join either one, whichever one you'd like to join, just to see what the discussions are. And you're also welcome to have a separate breakout room. We do have a separate room, is my understanding, where we can have conversations and people can continue what they started in the previous activity. So this whole morning session's only for working group members with the Neurotrauma Proceeds program, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll open it to anybody that would like to attend. And in this scenario, we will have an introduction from Michelle LaPlaca to introduce common data elements, because we had a survey that we sent out, and some of the comments in the survey were, what are CDEs? So we felt that we needed to introduce that at least, a little bit before we dive into the debrief on the 2 activities. So Aristée and Michelle will moderate that section. All right, and then tomorrow we have our federal partners, Stu and Melissa, will give their welcome remarks, and Ben will give us a recap of what happened the previous day. And we do have a recording from Neil Harris, as he's not able to be with us, with regards to the investigator perspective from the top NT on their multi-site perspective from MR imaging at the top NT consortium. And then after the break, we have Marianne Marton talking to us about the repository perspective. And her talk is titled CDEs in the Wild, the Impact of Precise TBI-CDE on Data Sharing Through the Open Data Commons TBI. And then after that, it's up to the working groups to decide if they want to come together and put their plans and decide on how they can move forward. Or if you just want to break off and just have lunch together, that would be awesome. All right, so as you can see here, this is our structure for the Neurotrauma Proceeds program. So I want to give a shout out to our Sapien CDE team. So Sharita is in the back, if you want to wave to everyone. She's our program manager, and we have Fatima in the back over there, as well as Yuktha. So they, together with, and I'm not sure who's online, with Henry and Sophia and Melissa and Mihir, have been doing an awesome job of trying to manage all of these different committees and different working groups. And, it's a lot to keep up with, and we do welcome any feedback. If you feel something is not working for your working group, please let us know. And all right, so all the working groups have been meeting every other week and have kicked off their CDE development. I think we're doing good progress. And we are trying to have a weekly highlights document so that if you're not able to watch all of the videos, you can keep up to pace with what's happening in the different meetings. So for the chairs of the working groups, if you see that there's something in there that needs to be corrected, please let us know. And it should be on the Google Drive, so feel free to make the changes that you see appropriate. So I think the biggest goal from today is for us to continue with defining what the scope is. As you all know, the program is limited with the contract support that we have. And so we want every group to decide what do they feel is doable and they have the bandwidth for, and what could be for the next iteration, so that we can keep things in mind as we plan for the future plans. We are working on the different program documents for the program description, for the whole review process. So all of the conversations that we happen today are going to inform how we finalize everything, including the definitions, as well as our team is working on some tutorial documents in the background. All right, so one of the biggest things that we have finalized with the steering committee is what our preclinical research scope is for the NT Proceeds program. And so this is our definition for preclinical research. It's experimental, clinically relevant studies to explore disease mechanisms, develop tools, and evaluate interventions. For this specific program, we are focusing on developing CDEs for the most common non-human mammal models, like rodent and porcine models. And we will not be covering data elements that are specific to studies in invertebrate animals, ex vivo models, or in vitro models. So this might come up in conversations. And so we thought having this preclinical scope will make it clear to everyone what we're working on. If you feel there is a model that is not being included that should be included, the steering committee wants it to be justified as to why we should include it, and it should be a model that will eventually translate into clinical testing. So we are keeping the door open if anyone feels strongly about a specific model that you'd like to have covered in the program. Does anyone have any comments for this definition? Anything online? All right. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to dive into the CDE development process. So what I'm showing here is a slide from our NINDS CDE repository director, Dr. Carolina Mendoza Puccini. And this is specifically for clinical CDEs. And so the process is that CDEs are identified and developed and vetted by experts in the scientific community. This should be a collaborative effort that involves other institutions, other institutes within NIH, as well as federal agencies. And then we want them to be aligned with the international data standards, as well as the CDISC consortium, as much as possible. And for the clinical CDEs, they also have insight from patient advocacy groups and industry, and NINDS keeps a continuous guidance, review, oversight, and update over these CDEs. And for TBI, they, and I believe also for spinal cord injury, I think, they review them every 3 years, and so they try to keep them up to date as much as possible. So this is our guide for the development process that we invite working group members, and then they start to meet. We have our initial meetings, and then we have an internal review, and then a public review, and then we have feedback. And so usually it's a timeline of around 18 months. And this is a snapshot from the TBI preclinical CDE efforts that happened in 2017. And you can see here that there's a slightly different step that was included. So it was the same idea where we had our, preclinical working groups that identified the most commonly used procedures, and then they listed all the common variables, and they put them into these form structures, but they had this extra step of testing the CDEs and the form structures on legacy data sets and analyzing that to make sure that these CDEs are usable. So for the clinical CDEs, there's a really, very structured method that has been happening for years. And for us with the preclinical, at least at NIH, we only had that the TBI efforts that happened. With the epilepsy CDE efforts, it was primarily the International League Against Epilepsy and the American Epilepsy Society that led the effort, and NIH was involved in that effort as well. So at NIH, we have this structure for the CDE task force, and the CDE governance committee is really who we are going to be submitting all the CDEs that will be developed under this program. And so some of the endorsement criteria that's listed here can help with some of the discussions that you may have in the activities today. They should have clear definitions of what the variable is, the measure with a clear definition of the variable, measure with prompt and response. So this is referring to the preferred question text. Some of this is sometimes more relevant to clinical CDEs than to preclinical, but we're trying our best to fit what we can with the clinical and see how we're going to address what doesn't fit with the clinical. So if you feel something is just off, please voice your opinion and let us know. They want them to be documented evidence of reliability and validity, to be human and machine readable format is the preferred format, and to be recommended or designated by a recognized NIH body. So this program is the recognized NIH body for the preclinical CDEs. With the clinical CDEs, there are validated instruments, and so that is where that licensing and IP status happens. As far as I know, we don't have that in preclinical CDEs. Is that correct? Are there any validated instruments or assays? Yeah, so I don't think that last one really applies to the preclinical.
I'm not sure if you're asking about the BBB and BMS are validated for spinal cord.
Okay, so for spinal cord injury, the BBB and BMS are validated tests. Do they have a license that people cannot use them unless they have a license? Okay. Okay. I see. Okay. So they do have a notice of copyright for those. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. We'll make sure to note that. Any other feedback? All right. And so for those that are not familiar with how the governance committee approves CDEs, we basically will compile them in the best shape possible, and then we will submit them, and that's the first step. After that, they will go to the governance committee to accept for whether they will review them or not. If they accept to review them, then they will go through the quality assurance checklist, and then it keeps going back and forth until we are happy with it and the NLM curators are happy with it. And then they can load it into the repository, the CDE repository, and then it will go to the governance committee for the final review. And then if it's accepted, then it will be endorsed and published at the NLM in the NIH endorsed CDE repository. And if not, then we do have a chance for us to revise and resubmit to satisfy their request. All right, so I'm going to go through the different steps in the process. This is, like we said, we have these general guidelines based on what I just mentioned with the clinical CDEs, but when we're coming to the preclinical, there are steps that we're like, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? What would be the best way? And I think we're still very early on in the program that we could make some changes based on what everybody thinks would be the best way for us to move forward. And so the first step, this is basically what we are doing right now. The first step is for each working group to define their scope. Oops. And that includes their purpose, objectives, the different CDE bundles that they want to cover in this version of the preclinical CDEs. And like we said, if they feel that there are others that are not very high priority right now that can wait till later because of bandwidth, then we also want to be aware of what those are. And then part of this process is that the working groups should be looking at what is currently available, reviewing those CDEs, and doing a gap analysis and identifying any CDEs or bundles of CDEs. So bundles of CDEs are usually those that you would have to do together in order to get the results that you want. So for example, the Mars water maze, it's usually a bundle of CDEs that come together. And I think at this point, hopefully, everybody has worked on the CDEs enough to be familiar with those terminologies. So this is part of activity 1, that we will have our sub-working groups continue with finalizing their scope and having their discussions. And our CDE team has put a template based on the pharmacology and interventions working group scope statement. So hopefully that will help everybody with that process. So as part of the next step, after defining exactly what the group wants to work on, we have the step 2 has 2 parts to it. So there are the existing CDE bundles where we're assigning 2 to 3 reviewers. And please make sure to confirm that it's your area of expertise. If you're not comfortable with reviewing that CDE bundle, just let us know. And the focus is to look at the different attributes for the definition, the permissible value, the preferred question text, and population species in the data dictionary. And then the following meeting is where the reviewers come back in 2 weeks, discuss their reviews and edits, and if they had any questions, I was thinking this, or I thought about this specific unit of measure that wasn't in the list. These are the discussions that should be happening at the meeting. And then you should also be trying to find any new CDEs that do belong in that bundle that have not been part of it. And then once that's complete, then we will move on to the next bundle of CDEs to discuss. Now, if there are new CDEs that you feel should be discussed by the working group, my understanding is that this is happening in parallel together with the existing CDE discussions. So you're welcome to bring that up, and then the same process will happen. And in the final meeting, after the reviewers have discussed it with the team, there should be a draft of the classification tiers as well as a draft of a guidance document. Now, we haven't really had the discussion of the classification tiers, and so I'm hoping that in this meeting today and tomorrow that we will have a better, clear understanding of where we stand with the definitions for what's core, what's considered recommended, and what's considered supplemental, so that we're all working on the same page. And then the guidance document is really your place as a working group to help the community decide how they want to use these CDEs. So it should have information about how you guys thought about the CDEs and put them together, as well as how you'd like people to utilize them. So you can add a lot more context to how you envision those CDEs being used. We are asking everyone to have references where applicable. So sometimes there's a reference that is not the primary source, or is the primary source for that data element, but it doesn't include the disease area. So it might be something that was in epilepsy but is not in traumatic brain injury. So we do want to have both if they are there. So we want to keep track of the primary source as well as any other references that are relevant to that disease area, if applicable. So just, make sure to note them. And I believe there is a column in the data dictionary where you can enter it, or you can just email our CDE team and they will upload it for you. So at this time, this is how our CDE team is collecting the votes from the working group members. So there are 2 columns where one of them tells you what the vote is on. So this one, for example, shows that the reviewer's vote is on the CDE name and the definition/description. So we want you to look at both columns E and F, and then choose whether you accept it as it is, or you accept it with updates to it. And then we want you to put the comment in the H column, what the comment is, and or you would not accept it, and we want to also know why you do not accept it. So I don't know if anyone has any questions at this point. Yes. Can you hold on, use the mic, please, so that people online can hear?
So, I've been working through this process for my subgroup, the pharmacology one, and I guess the question here is if we have 2 or 3 people for each item. What happens if one person says okay and one person says not okay? How do we, is it accept with comments, or, and what if the 2 of us, the 2 or 3 people?
I thought there was a separate sheet for each reviewer. Is that not the case?
Maybe. Well, when I looked at what other people have done, it looked like they might not have been, but maybe I didn't scroll all the way through. But
Okay,
it's
I
possible.
honestly have not kept track of it,
Okay.
but Sharita, if you have any feedback on that?
Most of the groups have a shared document. There are some which have separate ones, which were sent.
So how are we
The
keeping
idea
track
would be-
of the 2 reviewers' comments?
The initials would be added in the comments folder, in the comments column. So if the person, the second reviewer, is not incongruent, doesn't agree with the approval as different comment, then we ask them to put it in the comment column. The discussion would then be with the whole group. The whole group would then discuss those items and come to a consensus.
So would it be easier to have 2 separate columns so that we can keep track of each reviewer's? I mean, we're open to everything. So if that's, what does everyone else think? What's your feedback on this?
No, I was just going to agree because we had the exact same problem, so we had to discuss it, and so it would be preferable if you had 1, 2, because you mentioned even some groups have 3, so there has been some dialogue, so that would be nice if there was multiple
I
columns.
thought we were tracking them on different sheets, but
Yeah.
it looks like things have changed since then. All right, so we will make sure to update that moving forward because we do not want people to get more frustrated with an already overwhelming process. Any additional feedback on that?
So when does the discussion actually stop? I mean, there has to be some level, there has to be some point where, you guys truncate everything, because in some of these hot button issues, I don't know if you're ever going to get to agreement in certain spaces, and who adjudicates all of that?
Yeah, so that's where the Delphi process comes in, and we finalize the very final CDEs that make it through the cut. At least that's how I envision it. But Michelle also has a comment. Do we only have 1 mic in the room? I guess there's this mic.
Yeah, so I thought the Delphi process was going to be more with our kind of finished, I think we're talking here about the working group level where we can't agree on something about the CDE, if it should be included, or something about it, right? So that, I thought, and I could be wrong because I don't really fully understand the Delphi process, but I thought that stuff needed to be decided before we put it out for Delphi. I'm looking, I don't see any nods, so I don't know if that's right.
That's why we're having the discussion, so
Well,
that we can
right, so I know you're just doing the
finalize it.
introduction, but so if, in that case, like a lot of times what I find happens is that we table it, right? If a working group can't come to a agreement, we end up, sort of saying, oh, well, we'll talk about that later. And we're at that point where we can't do that anymore. So I think we do need either the CDE team, or we need somebody to be able to say, weigh the pros and cons to each side and say, this is what it is. Because if we put it out for the Delphi process for people to do that, then we're going to have researchers deciding these things. We're going back to square one because they don't see all of what went into getting up to that point. So I think, I don't know, personally, I would be okay with having a data science expert in CDEs who had some content knowledge to make the decision, because I know in Precise we've been just going, sometimes we just go around with it because there's so much other stuff to do.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's exactly why we're having this conversation.
I was going to say the same thing. In some cases, you might need referees, and they could be a combination of data science people and, ex officio government people. Not that I'm saying I'd volunteer, but,
Yeah.
people that don't have as much of a vested interest. And just realize, all of this stuff is going to be 95% accuracy or less. I hate to say it. We need the best possible compromises at this point. What we don't need is, perfect, because when you get to perfect, what you're saying is that you've already solved the problem. We all know that most of this field is still very much terra incognita. But what I'm saying is that there has to be room for discourse. Hopefully nobody gets their feelings hurt, because we're trying to be factual here.
Yeah.
And, at some point, we probably need some referees, because these are some hot button issues in some cases. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. Abel?
So, I mean, if we don't get into an agreement to a CD, then we can argue that it's not a common CD, right?
Right.
So maybe there are a set of CDs that we don't get into agreement, we table them up, and they are not what we consider common, right? So if at the end of the process of that Delphi, people feel very strong that that's not how that CD should be defined, then we just move on and keep just the common ones.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't think I'm arguing for or against a specific CDE. I think the issue is more of what information is supposed to be associated with a particular CDE. Sort of getting more into the weeds of the CDE. I'm not saying that what you just said is a possibility, yes, right? But if we all accept as a working group that a particular CDE is important, what is the content of that particular parameter that needs to be inputted? That's where the discussion is going to happen.
Yeah, so I will say a bit of the litmus test for that is mainly ask the question to yourself, do I have enough information to be able to know if I can pull that data? If you don't have enough information to know that you can pull that data or combine those data, then it's not a good CDE, right? And I think pretty much everybody can agree on that working definition, right? So I think if we move towards things, as I said, CDEs are hard because they have to be flexible enough to keep on being a living language, and they have to be standardized enough so you know that you can proceed forward. But yeah, I think we can do it. I think people will have differences. I think large language models, some of the other tools that I'm going to introduce, are going to be helpful in being able to search nuances so that people can get what they need. But I think if we just focus on, as I said, practicality, I think we should be able to come to a conclusion. Thanks.
So I'm just kind of confused. I think the CDE is a common data element. I think you guys are talking about the metadata that you need context for that CDE, correct? Is that what you're talking about?
All right, so I think with, most of you have probably already experienced it, and if you didn't, then you will soon, that whenever CDE discussions happen, there are people that are very detail-oriented, and they want every single data element to be a CDE, right? And in order for us to have reproducible protocols, that is a true statement. We should all have a clarity of what every data element that should go into the protocol. But we're not here to agree on protocols, right? We're here to agree on what's common. So if there are 5 different ways to do a specific experiment, what are all of these 5 different ways going to give us for us to understand the data? At least that's how I see common data elements as. So if we can craft our definition in a really clear way, I think that will help with the selection process and reduce a lot of the discussions without us having to say we're only going to have 10 CDEs. Putting a number, in my opinion, is not doing justice, but putting the criteria that fit what we agree as a common should, by the natural way of the process, select it. So I talked with the National Trauma Registry Repository, the NTRR. And they just had the Delphi process for their CDEs and their clinical CDEs. But the way they did it was they took all the existing CDEs and then they only showed the working group members the definition and the permissible values. That was all they saw. They didn't show them the rest of the data dictionary. And then they had the first round of Delphi where they said include, exclude, no opinion if they had no expertise. And so that was their Delphi. So they started off with the Delphi. We're kind of doing it where we're ending with the Delphi. So if everyone agrees, that might be a better way for us to start off with so that you're not spending time in all of the details of the CDE before we finalize them and then decide these are included or not. Or do the discussions help before we do the Delphi? So these are the kinds of things that we have leverage right now to decide on the process and for everyone to feel happy by the end that we did it the way that is proper. And so I see you, Aristea, but let me just finish what the NTRR did. So they did 3 rounds of Delphi. And so if a working group member had 10 people in it, they would ask the list of CDEs for that working group for them to go through. And then whatever everybody agreed on with 80% agreement was taken out of the list, and then they did another round. So they did 3 rounds. And 80% inclusion was their cutoff to consider it a common data element. So that's one way of incorporating the Delphi process and deciding on that. But I see Aristea, is there a microphone for, oh, sorry, Anthony, you were on before.
So, I have to plead that I have horrible ADD. But the one thing that I might have been missing is, what are the review criteria for a CDE? Because that's pretty central to this, if we can have a good definition for what fits and what doesn't. Because we've already had sort of a side discussion to metadata, and there are people that are trying to race ahead. One of the things that really could be valuable here in keeping tempo and keeping harmonization is actually having good review criteria for your CDEs. And maybe that was presented in some of this. I might have missed it.
That's the activity for after lunch for the Neurotrauma Core Working Group, is to come up with those selection criteria and for us to all agree on what is common in general, what is common for the core CDEs, and what is common for anything else that we want to apply, whether it's, like imaging, for example, or experimental commonality versus what's common for a specific disease area. So there are different levels that we can discuss what is common in our definition, and hopefully with all the amazing expertise and brains in the room, we can hopefully finalize it by the end of this workshop. That's my hope. I really, really hope we can all agree on the review process, and we can all agree on the definitions of what is common, so that we can, once we get back to our working group meetings, we can just keep moving and finish off. So, Aristea?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the question that you raised. I don't think we can start with a Delphi because part of the process that we do is, number one, reconcile different sources of CDs. Every group that created different batches of CDs, they had some different starting point. So the discussion needs to be done before you go into the Delphi. And the other aspect is the structure of whatever CDs we create in terms of, as you mentioned, core, supplementary, and so on.
Right.
So there is a lot of preparation that needs to be done before engaging the groups for voting for Delphi
Yeah,
process.
I think the discussions also help with people making the decision. So it sounds like we have one vote for keeping the Delphi later on. Any votes for making it earlier on? Okay, Ben?
Actually, this is a chat question.
Okay.
I thought I'd let it on. So the question is, we talked about reviewing the existing CDEs. How to avoid missing some CDEs that are really needed, a gap analysis. I feel we cannot just focus on one existing CDE source. Instead, we have to review, combine all related existing CDE sources. Kind of what Aristotle was saying.
Yeah, that's a valid point. So in the scenario with the NTRR, they were looking at existing clinical CDEs. And then they did not have the Delphi for the newly formed CDEs. So it's definitely a valid point that we should have all the CDEs developed before we can have that process and give it due diligence. Thank you. Maria?
Okay, I will say, I mean, we are working towards that goal, again, with some of the large language models. Actually, I just saw a paper that came out, I shared with the data science group. Some of the work that I'm doing, using semantic search embeddings is a really good way to get large databases of common data elements and then cluster them and then kind of keep on reducing these into one or a single common data element. Right now, there was, as I said, the Monarch Initiative just put out a nice paper showing this. It has a whole bunch of different common data elements from a bunch of different groups, and they've begun to group these by basically meaning, right? And so then we're going, so then we don't miss the data elements because they're all in this vector database. And they're beginning to be grouped by meaning, and we're slowly coming, being able as a group to to come to consensus where we need to and be divergent where we need to. So it seems almost hopeless if you don't have the tools, but I really think we have the tools to go forward. As I said, I know Bricks also, we have a lot of those tools set up. To start, we're starting to do semantic searches in our cross-mapping tool, so don't give up hope.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's happening in the clinical space that we could definitely learn from and apply. The only difference that I see at this point, in this stage, is that we, like with the clinical CDEs, FITBR, for example, all the studies in FITBR are mapped to CDEs, right? Whereas with the preclinical, we don't really have that many studies. So until we have enough studies that are mapping their data to CDEs and storing them in the repositories, I think it'll be hard to kind of use that tool.
Yeah, so we do have, for instance, for the spinal cord, people are putting unharmonized data dictionaries. So they're just basically saying similar things in different ways. So that is also, well, I mean, I think Jeff said sometimes they don't put enough information in, so the grouping doesn't work very well. But if they actually define it relatively well in their data dictionary, those things can also be pulled and screened. People posting the individual unharmonized data dictionaries and put in a vector database and clustered, and you can begin to see what the community is, and you can maybe find a group that you might not have considered. But as I said, it all depends on how well, if they don't describe it well enough at all, then that's the problem.
The paper that came out from Adam and Abel's group about community data elements, it fits that, yeah. Michelle?
So I feel like we've drifted a little bit in this conversation. Am I correct to think that there's two issues here with review? One is actually reviewing and developing the CDs to begin with at the group working level, and then there's the whether we should include this in the master database or the consensus that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Is that not, because we can't, I mean, I guess you could use Delphi process for both of those, which would kind of be the beginning, and then, towards, as we kind of evolve them, but are we talking about two processes, or is that a correct? That's how I feel during this conversation's going.
Our focus right now is on the development and review within the working groups. But we have to keep the community uptake in mind as we are developing them. So they are kind of integrated. We cannot disconnect, but our conversation is primarily for the review process. Yes.
This might be a good time to point out that we do have implementation people who are part of the group.
Yes.
So down the road, we will be deliberate about that, right, Hibah?
Yes.
And I also say it kind of comes all together because people are concerned that there's data elements out there that they're not thinking about now because it's not their special expertise. So when I was talking about trying to screen what's out there, it's really to make sure that we're capturing in these new data elements everything we need. I think that was the concern from the chat, right? So, and that is maybe impossible, right? We have a certain scope, right? But this is one way we can maybe screen for ideas that we might not have represented, but might be in the community with a high frequency.
So yeah, for the sake of time, if you have any thoughts and ideas, please write them down and bring them to the activity after lunch so that we can expand more on this discussion. But things to keep in mind are, we want to make sure we're including evidence of rigor and reliable criteria. And there are ways for data sets to be linked to the protocols. So if you're worried about every data element being there so that somebody can do the protocol correctly, don't worry about that. Because if you look at ODC TBI, every data set is linked to protocols.io with the protocol that they use to get that data. So there are ways to handle that other than making every data element a CDE. All right, so moving on. So this is what we're looking at when we talk about the classification criteria. And I will leave this discussion further for the Neurotrauma Core Working Group in their second activity. I think both Michelle and Aristea, Neil and Adam and Kareem have the experience to handle this discussion based on how are we defining general core versus disease core. So general core is usually something that is essential, or a data element that is essential to report for all preclinical studies. And this is what we're calling our core, neurotrauma core CDEs. And then there's the disease core where there's a CDE that is very essential for TBI, and it might not be essential for spinal cord injury. So it could be a data element that is core in TBI, but is recommended in SCI. And so there could be those distinctions between the different disease areas. And so we have these definitions here, but we do have the leverage to change some of those definitions whichever way we feel best fits the preclinical standards, because a lot of these come from originally were in the clinical CDEs, and we adopted them and adjusted them, whether it was through the task 3 for ILAE AES, or whether it was through Precise TBI or through some of the other efforts with SCI. And so some of these classifications are very focused on disease areas, and the ILAE AES task 3, they also had a different classification when it came to experiments, where they had high priority and low priority. And so there are different levels of how we can classify a CDE, and it's up to us as a group and a community to really, decide how we want to move forward and agree how to do it. So please, keep your comments coming. So we do have our speaker from the FDA joining us at 10, and so I want to try to go through the next steps so that we're all on the same page. So after going through the CDEs and, vetting them, deciding on what is missing, what is there, and getting all of the information there, our CDE curators will take the CDEs and format them, make sure that everything is there. If anything is missing, they will come back to the experts and get in all that information. And then the plan is to map them to the common data model. So we are proposing to use CDISC Send because that is the only one that we were able to find as a data standard for non-clinical data elements. So CDISC is used by the FDA. Some of the advantages is that it has control terminology, and it has a hierarchy of grouping variables. And this was some of the discussions that we had with the PRECISE group and the PTE group as to what is a domain, what's a subdomain, or what's a category and a subcategory, and everybody had a slightly different definition. And because CDISC also has the clinical aspect, I think one of the advantages is that for TBI, there is a whole CDISC standard for therapeutic standards that could be used and mapped with preclinical. So there are some advantages to using CDISC Send. However, it's something that, we all need to agree on that it is the best way to go forward or not. And that's the activity that we have for the data science working group after the break after the coffee break, but before the lunch. So they will hear from our FDA speaker, and then they can look through the CDISC Send details and decide on that. So these are some of the things that I personally felt would be very helpful, that they have metadata, 7 attributes at the data set level. They have the metadata for the variable levels, another 7 attributes. And then they have the metadata for the value level. So for example, whether a measure was collected as is or whether it was derived by a calculation. So a lot of these, I think, are very applicable to preclinical data in neurotrauma. With the control terminology, some of it links with sometimes you plan an experiment and then there's a change in that schedule for it. They have a way of how you handle it and what that data element would be called and how you would put it into your data set. If one of the animals dies for whatever reason and you have to terminate the study, there is a way for you to put that variable and to identify it just by using their structure, that you're able to see the difference between the data sets and the way the data was collected. And for example, if you're doing specific days in a study and then you have an additional day that you want to add, they have a way of doing it, and so on. And then the hierarchy of the grouping variables. So they have, starting with a study, and then it goes to a domain, then there's a category, a subcategory, and then a unique subject identifier. And then if you have them all grouped, they have a group ID. So I think a lot of it is applicable, and we could, if we don't adopt it as is, then we might be able to at least modify some of it to fit what works for preclinical CDEs. And then there's a whole lot about the different domains, and I will leave this discussion for all of our data science working group to deal with. But they also have these pool identifiers. So if you want to look at all of these different treatment groups and you have multiple subjects in them, they also have a way to bring them together. So there is this implementation guide that is on the Google Drive for everyone to access. So I'm hoping our data science working group will be very productive with their activity for that. And then the fourth step is for us to validate those CDEs with data sets, because that's really the only way we can know whether these CDEs are complete or whether they still need a little bit of tweaking. And then the Delphi process that we've been talking about. And so, so these are some of the discussions that I hope the CDE leads and the steering committee and anybody that's, has experience with the Delphi process, that we can have these discussions and come up with a solution and the sequence of the steps. And then after that, we will share a draft with all of our NC Proceeds members, just for a quick look to make sure that everything, makes sense. And then we'll post them for 30 to 60 days for the public to give us feedback. And then we'll be ready to submit them to become NIH endorsed through the governance committee. So these are the 7 steps and in this sequence. And so we will revisit towards the end in the closing remarks and see if we need to move them around or shift something based on the discussions. But this is the review process, and we do have different definitions. All of these are in the Google Drive for people to take a look at, and for us to decide, what would be the best way for us to move forward. So I think that covers everything, and we are right on time. So is